Did you know that one of the Church's most beloved saints was once considered too slow to become a priest? He struggled with Latin, nearly lost his vocation, and even spent more than a year hiding in the mountains after being separated from his military unit. Yet this humble man would later draw thousands to Ars, leading countless souls back to God through confession. He changed the Church not through brilliance, but through holiness. This is the story of Saint John Mary Vianney, the patron saint of parish priests. Before beginning, drop an Amen in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of the saints. Share this story so that others may discover the extraordinary power of a life completely surrendered to God. Chapter 1. A child of Dardilly. Jean Marie Vianney was born on the 8th of May, 1786, in Dardilly, a farming village near Lyon, France. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Mathieu and Marie Vianney, a hard-working Catholic couple whose home was poor in comforts, but rich in faith. From his earliest years, Jean learned that prayer belonged at the center of life. His family worked long days in the fields, yet they gathered faithfully to pray. The rosary, Sunday worship, generosity toward travelers, and care for the poor shaped his childhood. Jean was quiet, gentle, and deeply sensitive to the things of God. While other children played, he often withdrew to pray before a small image of the Blessed Virgin. He shared what little he possessed and showed a tenderness toward anyone who suffered. His childhood unfolded during the violence of the French Revolution. Churches were closed, religious images destroyed, and priests who refused to submit to the revolutionary government were hunted, imprisoned, exiled, or killed. Public Catholic worship became dangerous. The Vianney family remained faithful. At night, they sometimes traveled secretly to isolated houses or barns where fugitive priests celebrated Mass. Jean watched these courageous men risk their lives to bring Christ to the faithful, and their witness left a permanent mark upon him. He received his first communion in secrecy, away from the eyes of the authorities. Before the hidden altar, Jean encountered the Eucharistic Lord, for whom priests and families were willing to suffer. From that moment, his desire to serve at the altar became increasingly clear. Jean wanted to become a priest so that he might bring Jesus to others, just as persecuted priests had brought Jesus to him. His vocation began not in comfort or recognition, but amid danger, whispered prayers, and the silent courage of a suffering church. Chapter 2. The difficult road to priesthood. Jean's desire for the priesthood grew stronger, but there was an enormous obstacle. He had received little formal education. Years of revolution and farm work had kept him from school, and he was already a young man when he began serious studies. Latin proved especially difficult. It was the language used in seminary instruction and theological examinations, yet Jean struggled to memorize vocabulary and understand grammar. Lessons that others mastered quickly seemed to disappear from his mind almost as soon as he learned them. His difficulties embarrassed him. Younger students advanced beyond him, and some classmates mocked his mistakes. At times, he feared that his limited abilities might prevent him from ever reaching the altar. Still, beneath every disappointment remained the certainty that God had called him. Father Charles Bally, the parish priest of Écully, recognized something others overlooked. Jean was not intellectually gifted, but he possessed humility, perseverance, compassion, and an extraordinary life of prayer. Father Bally agreed to teach him privately and became his spiritual father. Jean studied from morning until night. He repeated lessons while walking through the fields, memorized passages aloud, and returned patiently to every failed exercise. Progress came slowly, often through tears, but he refused to surrender the vocation entrusted to him. When discouragement became overwhelming, he turned toward the tabernacle. Jean gradually understood that a priest must possess knowledge, but knowledge alone cannot save souls. The heart of priesthood is union with Christ, fidelity to prayer, and a willingness to sacrifice oneself for others. His academic weakness would follow him for years, yet so would Father Bally's confidence. Where others saw an unsuitable student, his mentor saw a soul being prepared by grace. Jean's journey showed that God does not always choose the strongest. He strengthens those who trust him. Chapter 3. A Vocation Interrupted. In 1809, while Jean was preparing for the priesthood, France was consumed by Napoleon's wars. Although seminarians had previously received exemptions, Jean was drafted into the army. Suddenly, the vocation for which he had struggled seemed threatened by forces beyond his control. He reported for duty, but his frail health soon failed. After being hospitalized, he was ordered to rejoin his military unit. During the journey, however, he became separated from the other recruits and wandered through unfamiliar countryside, exhausted and uncertain. A young man eventually guided him toward the remote village of Les Noes, where several deserters were hiding. Jean faced a painful situation. Returning immediately could lead to punishment, yet remaining away made him a fugitive in the eyes of the authorities. He stayed in Les Noes under the name Jérôme Vincent and found shelter among villagers who protected him. Rather than live idly, he taught local children, instructed them in the faith, helped families with their work, and continued praying for his vocation. Every unexpected sound could mean the arrival of soldiers. Jean lived with uncertainty, separated from the seminary and unable to receive the sacraments regularly. Yet the hidden months became another school of patience, trust, and dependence upon God. He did not know whether he would ever return to his studies. Nevertheless, he continued living as a future priest, teaching, serving, praying, and accepting daily hardship. The vocation seemed buried, but beneath the silence, God was deepening its roots. In 1810, an imperial amnesty made it possible for Jean to return home without punishment. He emerged from hiding more mature and more determined. War had delayed his path, but it had not extinguished the call God had placed within him. Chapter 4. Ordained through grace. After returning, Jean resumed his studies under Father Bally. The difficulties remained. He entered the minor seminary and later the major seminary, but the Latin lectures were almost impossible for him to follow, and he was eventually dismissed because of his poor academic performance. For many men, that humiliation would have ended everything. Jean returned to Father Bally, wounded but not defeated. His mentor continued teaching him privately and appealed to church authorities, convinced that Jean possessed the essential qualities of a faithful priest. Jean was examined again, this time with greater consideration for his limitations. He was permitted to answer questions in French rather than Latin. His responses showed sound faith, practical understanding, and sincere devotion, even if they lacked scholarly elegance. The Church finally recognized that holiness and pastoral wisdom were growing within this struggling student. Jean was ordained a deacon in 1815, and on August 13 of that year, received priestly ordination in Grenoble. Years of failure had led at last to the altar. Because his superiors remained uncertain about his theological preparation, he was not immediately permitted to hear confessions. Jean accepted this restriction without resentment. He regarded priesthood not as a personal achievement, but as an undeserved gift to be received in humility. He returned to Eckerley as Father Bally's assistant. There, under the guidance of the priest who had never abandoned him, Jean learned pastoral ministry through daily service, celebrating Mass, teaching children, visiting the sick, helping the poor, and preparing souls for the sacraments. When Father Bally died in 1817, Jean lost his teacher and spiritual father. Soon afterward, he received a new mission, the tiny village of Ars. Few could have imagined that this forgotten place would become known throughout the Catholic world. Chapter 5. The Forgotten Village of Ars. In February 1818, Father Vianney traveled toward Ars, a village of barely a few hundred inhabitants. Mist covered the countryside, and he became uncertain of the road. Tradition remembers him asking a young shepherd for directions and promising, "You have shown me the way to Ars. I will show you the way to heaven." The village was materially poor and spiritually indifferent. Years of revolution had weakened religious life. Many inhabitants seldom attended Mass. Sunday labor was common, drunkenness caused suffering, and dances at local taverns often led people further from prayer and family responsibility. Father Vianney did not begin by condemning everyone from a distance. He entered the church, knelt before the tabernacle, and prayed. He knew that sermons alone could not revive a parish. Before speaking to the people about God, he would speak to God about the people. He visited every household, learned the names and struggles of his parishioners, cared for the sick, and taught the children himself. He repaired and beautified the neglected church, desiring that its visible dignity would awaken reverence for the presence of Christ. His preaching was direct and sometimes severe, particularly concerning drunkenness, neglect of Sunday worship, and behavior that harmed families. Yet his words carried authority because he demanded far more from himself than from anyone else. His sacrifices revealed that his warnings came from love. At first, some villagers resisted him. Others considered him extreme, but they could not ignore his poverty, his long hours of prayer, or his tenderness toward the suffering. His life became the most convincing sermon he preached. Slowly, the parish changed. Families returned to Mass. Children learned the catechism, the confessional reopened, and Eucharistic devotion deepened. Ars was not renewed through wealth or elaborate plans, but through one priest who believed no soul was beyond the reach of grace. Chapter 6. A priest consumed by love. Father Vianney embraced an austere way of life. He ate little, often surviving on potatoes, bread, or simple soup. His room contained almost nothing. His cassock became worn, and he slept only a few hours before rising again to pray. His penances were severe, at times more severe than would be advisable for others to imitate. He offered them for the conversion of his parishioners, believing that a shepherd must be willing to suffer for the flock entrusted to him. Yet his austerity toward himself was matched by extraordinary generosity toward others. He gave away money, clothing, furniture, and food. When someone in need approached him, he often surrendered whatever he possessed, trusting that Providence would provide again. He founded La Providence, a home and school for orphaned and impoverished girls. Though the institution constantly lacked money and food, Father Vianney refused to abandon the children. He begged, prayed, and sometimes witnessed provisions arrive when every human resource had failed. At the center of his life stood the Eucharist. He celebrated Mass with such reverence that observers sensed he was standing before a mystery greater than the visible world. Hours before the tabernacle gave him the strength to endure exhaustion and carry the burdens of others. Father Vianney also reported disturbing events at night, violent noises, shaking furniture, and other unexplained attacks. He called the tormentor the Grappin and interpreted these disturbances as attempts by the devil to discourage his work for souls. Whether suffering from hunger, fatigue, misunderstanding, or spiritual assault, he remained at his post. He discovered that evil is not overcome by spectacle, but by prayer, humility, perseverance, and unwavering trust in the victory of Christ. Chapter 7. The Confessional of Mercy. As Ars was transformed, news of its holy pastor traveled beyond the village. First came visitors from nearby towns. Then pilgrims arrived from across France and other parts of Europe, drawn by reports of a priest whose words brought peace to troubled consciences. The small railway stations near Ars became crowded. Carriages filled the roads, inns overflowed, and pilgrims sometimes waited for days. They were not seeking grand architecture or famous relics. They came because they desired confession, guidance, and a new beginning. During the busiest years, Father Vianney heard confessions for as many as 16 hours a day. In winter, the confessional was bitterly cold. In summer, it was stifling. He endured hunger, illness, and exhaustion, so that no repentant soul would be turned away. He possessed an exceptional understanding of the human heart. Numerous witnesses testified that he sometimes identified forgotten or concealed sins before penitents mentioned them, yet his purpose was never to astonish. He desired only to bring each person into the light of God's mercy. With hardened sinners, he could be firm. With the wounded and ashamed, he was gentle. At times he wept while listening, causing a penitent to ask why. "I weep because you do not weep," he reportedly answered, grieving the damage sin had caused to a beloved soul. He gave simple counsel: pray faithfully, avoid occasions of sin, receive the sacraments, repair injustice, and begin again. His words carried power because they came from a man who had spent the night praying for those who would kneel before him the next day. Through that narrow wooden confessional, countless people encountered the Father who runs to welcome the returning child. Father Vianney became known not because he made confession easy or meaningless, but because he revealed the seriousness of sin and the greater power of mercy. Chapter 8. Signs of Providence. Many remarkable events were associated with Father Vianney's ministry. Some pilgrims reported physical healings after receiving his blessing or joining him in prayer. Others experienced conversions so profound that their families considered them no less miraculous. There were also accounts connected with La Providence. On one occasion, when the home's supply of grain was nearly exhausted, the storage loft was reportedly found filled after earnest prayer. Father Vianney attributed every favor to God and refused to accept praise. When people asked him to pray for healing, he often directed them towards Saint Philomena, a martyr for whom he had great devotion. When favors followed, he insisted that the saint had obtained them, skillfully turning attention away from himself. His most extraordinary gift may have been his discernment of souls. Pilgrims testified that he knew private struggles, recognized unspoken grief, or gave an answer to a question before it was asked. Such moments led many skeptics to examine their lives honestly. Yet Father Vianney remained suspicious of fame. He feared that admiration might distract people from Christ or tempt him toward pride. He called himself a poor sinner and often seemed genuinely bewildered that anyone would travel so far to see him. For him, the greatest miracle was neither multiplied food nor restored health. It was absolution, a sinner returning after decades, a broken family reconciled, an unbeliever kneeling in faith, or a dying person receiving the sacraments in peace. Ars became a living testimony that prayer changes reality. Through a priest who possessed little education, no wealth, and no worldly influence, God provided for the poor, healed wounded consciences, and awakened faith in thousands of hearts. Chapter 9. The Shepherd Who Could Not Leave. The immense demands of Ars gradually exhausted Father Vianney. His body became thin and frail, his voice weakened, and illness frequently interrupted his work. Nevertheless, the pilgrims continued coming, and he continued returning to the confessional. He longed for solitude. Father Vianney believed he was poorly prepared for the responsibility placed upon him and feared that he might be judged for failing to serve souls well. More than once, he attempted to leave Ars and enter a quieter life of prayer. Each attempt ended in his return. Parishioners and pilgrims searched for him, begged him not to abandon them, or blocked his departure. He interpreted their pleas and the instructions of his superiors as signs that God still required him in Ars. His return was not a defeat, but another sacrifice. The silence he desired was holy, yet obedience required him to remain amid crowds, noise, and endless human suffering. He surrendered even his desire for solitude to the will of God. In his final years, he suffered from fever, coughing, pain, and extreme weakness. Friends urged him to rest, but he continued hearing confessions whenever strength allowed. "We shall rest in the other life," he told those concerned about him. His ministry had become a continual offering. Every exhausted step, interrupted meal, sleepless night, and painful confession was united to the sacrifice of Christ. He had once feared he was too weak to become a priest. Now his weakness had become the place where grace shone most clearly. The Curé of Ars no longer belonged to himself. For more than 40 years, he had poured out his life for one village and for the pilgrims who came from far beyond it. Like the candle beside the tabernacle, he gave light by allowing himself to be consumed. Chapter 10. Death of the Curé of Ars. By the summer of 1859, Father Vianney's health was failing rapidly. Even then, pilgrims continued arriving, hoping to confess or receive one final blessing. He tried to serve them until his body could no longer leave the rectory. A fierce heat settled over Ars. Fever weakened him, and breathing became difficult. Parishioners gathered outside, while priests remained near his bedside. The man who had prepared thousands for death was now approaching his own final passage. He received the sacraments with deep devotion. There was no dramatic speech and no desire to draw attention to himself. His final hours reflected his entire life: prayerful, humble, poor, and centered upon Christ. In the early morning of the 4th of August, 1859, Jean Mary Vianney died at the age of 73. The bells of Ars announced that the pastor who had given everything for his people had completed his earthly mission. Grief spread throughout the village. Men, women, children, priests, peasants, and nobles came to pray beside his body. They mourned not merely a famous preacher, but a spiritual father who had carried their sins, sorrows, and hopes before God. Tens of thousands joined the funeral ceremonies or came to Ars soon afterward. The obscure village priest, whose teachers once doubted his abilities, was now honored by the church he had served through hidden sacrifice. His death did not end the mission of Ars. Pilgrims continued arriving, confessions continued to be heard, and priests began looking toward his life for encouragement. The humble pastor had entered heaven, but his witness remained beside every priestly altar and confessional. Chapter 11. Patron of Parish Priests. The Church carefully examined Father Vianney's life, virtues, reputation for holiness, and miracles attributed to his intercession. Pope St. Pius II beatified him in 1905 and declared him patron of parish priests in France. On the 31st of May, 1925, Pope Pius XI canonized Jean Mary Vianney. 4 years later, the same Pope proclaimed him patron saint of parish priests throughout the world, recognizing in him an enduring model of pastoral charity. His body is venerated in the Basilica of Ars. His face and hands are covered with wax coverings, while his heart is preserved separately as a relic. Pilgrims from every continent continue coming to pray and receive the Sacrament of Reconciliation. Saint John Vianney left no great theological system and founded no worldwide religious order. His legacy was the daily holiness of parish ministry, reverent masses, patient catechesis, care for the poor, spiritual guidance, and countless hours spent reconciling sinners with God. He reminds priests that pastoral fruitfulness begins not with popularity, organization, or eloquence, but with friendship with Christ. A priest can guide others toward God only when he himself continually returns to prayer, the Eucharist, and the cross. His life also offers hope to everyone who feels inadequate. Jean struggled academically, endured humiliation, and repeatedly confronted his own weakness. Yet when that weakness was placed in God's hands, it became an instrument for the conversion of thousands. The Curé of Ars changed the Church not because the world considered him brilliant, but because he allowed Christ to possess his heart completely. His life proclaims a timeless truth. Holiness is the most powerful form of pastoral ministry. Chapter 12. A Prayer to Saint John Mary Vianney. Saint John Mary Vianney, faithful servant of Christ and humble pastor of Ars, we thank God for the witness of your holy life. Teach us to seek not worldly praise, but the joy of belonging completely to Jesus. You knew weakness, failure, humiliation, and exhaustion, yet you never abandoned the vocation God entrusted to you. Intercede for all who feel unworthy or discouraged, that they may trust in the power of grace rather than their own abilities. Patron of parish priests, pray for the priests of the Church. Strengthen those who are tired, lonely, misunderstood, or burdened by ministry. Help them remain faithful to prayer, joyful in service, and close to the people entrusted to their care. Obtain for every priest a deep love for the Eucharist and the Sacrament of Reconciliation. May they celebrate Mass with reverence, preach the truth with charity, and welcome repentant sinners with the merciful heart of Christ. Teach all the faithful to value the gift of the priesthood. Awaken new vocations in families and parishes, and give young men the call to answer when Christ calls them to leave everything and follow him. Saint John Vianney, help us return frequently to confession, forgive those who have wounded us, care for the poor, and persevere in prayer. Lead our hearts away from sin and toward the freedom found only in Jesus. Holy Curé of Ars, accompany us throughout our earthly pilgrimage. May we live faithfully, carry our crosses with love, and one day rejoice with you before the face of God. Saint John Mary Vianney, pray for us. Amen.